You're standing in the dairy aisle, looking for something healthy. You reach for a yogurt. It says probiotic on the front. It says live and active cultures. Maybe it says natural or light or gut friendly. Maybe there's a green leaf somewhere on the packaging or a little heart icon. You put it in your cart, feeling good about yourself, feeling like you made the smart, health-conscious choice. You get home, you eat it, you do that for months, maybe years, and the entire time, the food inside that container is quietly doing something to your body that the label never warned you about, something the brand spent millions of dollars making sure you never thought to question. That is the story of yogurt in 2025 and 2026. And once you understand what is actually happening in some of the most popular yogurt products in America, you will never look at that dairy aisle the same way again. Let me be clear before we go any further, because I'm not here to mislead you. Real yogurt, plain, minimally processed yogurt made from cultured milk, is genuinely one of the most nutritious foods you can eat. It is rich in protein, calcium, probiotics, and beneficial compounds that research has consistently linked to improved gut health, better metabolic function, and reduced risk of chronic disease. The problem is not yogurt. The problem is what the food industry has done to yogurt. The problem is the gap between what yogurt is supposed to be and what most of the brightly packaged products in that dairy case have actually become. That gap has a name. Researchers and nutritionists call it ultra-processing. And understanding what ultra-processing actually means, not as a buzzword, not as marketing language, but as a precise scientific description of what happens to food before it reaches your mouth, is going to completely change how you evaluate everything you buy. So let's start there, with the science, with the real definition. The NOVA classification system was developed by researchers at the University of São Paulo, and it is now the most widely used framework for categorizing foods by their degree of processing. It breaks all food into 4 groups. Group 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods, things like fresh fruits, vegetables, plain milk, eggs, plain meat. Group 2 is processed culinary ingredients, oils, butter, flour, salt. Group 3 is processed foods, things like canned vegetables, cheese, cured meats, products that use preservation or fermentation techniques on whole food. Group 4 is ultra-processed foods. And this is the category that is reshaping how the scientific community understands chronic disease in the modern world. Ultra-processed foods, according to NOVA, are not just heavily processed versions of real food. They are industrial formulations that use ingredients extracted from foods or derived from food constituents. Things like modified food starch, hydrolyzed protein, and isolated fibers, combined with substances produced by further processing of food constituents, and often with additives whose purpose is to imitate sensory qualities of food or to disguise undesirable qualities. Flavors that taste like strawberry but contain no strawberry. Colors extracted from beets or synthetically produced to make something look like fruit. Thickeners and stabilizers and emulsifiers that create a texture that feels creamy and fresh even when the product has been sitting in a warehouse for months. This is what ultra-processed food is. Not just food that has been cooked or fermented or packaged, but food that has been engineered in a laboratory to look, smell, and feel like something it fundamentally is not. According to the Make America Healthy Again report published in May 2025, approximately 70% of over 300,000 branded food products in American grocery stores today are ultra-processed. 70%. Ultra-processed foods currently make up more than half of what American adults eat on a daily basis, and nearly 2/3 of what children and teenagers consume. This is not a minor nutritional footnote. This is the defining dietary reality of modern American life, and the health consequences are now documented with a clarity that is genuinely alarming. A landmark study published in The Lancet in March 2025 analyzed data across 15.9 years and over 427,000 participants. The findings were unambiguous. People who regularly consumed ultra-processed foods had a significantly higher overall risk of dying from any cause. Not just one condition, not just heart disease or diabetes, from all causes. Cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, ischemic heart disease, digestive diseases, Parkinson's disease. The more ultra-processed food in the diet, the higher the mortality risk. Those numbers represent real people, real lives, real outcomes. The 2025 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee acknowledged a link between ultra-processed food consumption and obesity in both children and adults. Research published in April 2025 found that food additive emulsifiers, the specific chemicals used in many yogurts to control texture and shelf life, are associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. The FDA and the USDA, as of July 2025, opened a formal request for information to develop a uniform federal definition of ultra-processed foods, signaling that this is no longer a niche academic concern. It is officially a public health priority. Now here's the part that directly involves your yogurt. Yogurt is one of the most expertly marketed health foods in the supermarket. It has a centuries-old reputation as a probiotic powerhouse, a gut-healing fermented food trusted across cultures for generations. That reputation is completely deserved when we're talking about real, traditionally made yogurt. But the food industry recognized long ago that this trusted health reputation was an enormously valuable marketing asset. And over the past several decades, they have systematically exploited that reputation while simultaneously engineering products that bear less and less resemblance to the food that earned it. The Cornucopia Institute, a nonprofit farm policy research group, published a detailed investigation titled Culture Wars: How the Food Giants Turned Yogurt, a Health Food, into Junk Food. The findings were damning. Major yogurt manufacturers had taken a Bocanu product with genuine nutritional credibility and loaded it with sugar, artificial sweeteners, synthetic preservatives, industrial thickeners, artificial colors, and emulsifiers, while continuing to market it with the full weight of yogurt's healthy reputation. The report accused Dannon, Yoplait, Chobani, and other major brands of misleading parents who were making purchasing decisions based on the assumption that they were buying a health food. Let's talk about the specific products and the specific ingredients that are at the center of this story, because the detail is what makes this real. Dannon Light and Fit is one of the best-selling yogurt lines in America. It is specifically marketed toward health-conscious consumers, people watching their weight, people trying to eat better. The strawberry cheesecake flavor, which sounds like a treat, is being actively bought as a healthy option by millions of people. Look at the ingredients. You will find modified food starch, artificial sweeteners, preservatives. This is not a health food by any reasonable scientific definition of that phrase. It is an ultra-processed product that uses yogurt's cultural credibility to occupy a shelf position in the health food category, while containing ingredients that independent research increasingly links to gut microbiome disruption and metabolic harm. The people buying it believe they are making a healthy choice. The label is specifically designed to support that belief. And the gap between that belief and biological reality is what this entire conversation is about. Activia. If you grew up watching television commercials in the United States, you know the Activia brand. For decades, it has been marketed with the explicit message that it supports digestive health through its unique probiotic cultures. That positioning is worth billions. The brand name has become almost synonymous with gut health in popular culture. But look at the actual ingredients in Activia low-fat vanilla yogurt. You will find modified food starch, a refined carbohydrate that converts rapidly to glucose during digestion. You will find gelatin. You will find natural flavors, which is a catch-all term that covers hundreds of different possible chemical compounds and tells you almost nothing about what is actually in the product. You will find carrageenan. That last ingredient, carrageenan, deserves its own extended discussion because the science emerging around it is some of the most important and least publicized nutritional research of the last several years. Carrageenan is a high molecular weight polysaccharide extracted from red seaweed. It has been used as a food additive for decades precisely because it is exceptional at creating smooth, creamy textures in dairy products. It is found in countless yogurts, coffee creamers, ice creams, and infant formulas. Regulators have historically considered it safe. The food industry has been relying on it for generations. But the research published over the last few years paints a genuinely troubling picture. A 2025 study published in Inflammatory Bowel Diseases by researchers examining intestinal epithelial cells found that carrageenan amplifies the inflammatory profile of the intestinal epithelium in patients with Crohn's disease. Research published in January 2025 in Science Direct, examining microbiome-mediated impacts of carrageenan, found that it increases pro-inflammatory bacterial species, including Desulfovibrio desulfuricans and Ruminococcus torquus, while simultaneously decreasing Bifidobacterium, one of the most important beneficial bacterial families in the human gut. A landmark, placebo-controlled randomized trial published in Clinical Gastroenterology and Hepatology in August 2025, studying the effects of dietary emulsifiers on 60 healthy participants, found that emulsifier supplementation lowered short-chain fatty acid levels, compounds that are critical for gut lining integrity and immune regulation. A peer-reviewed study published in PMC summarized the body of research this way. Evidence from in vitro studies, animal studies, and limited human studies indicates that carrageenan can alter gut microbiota composition, disrupt intestinal barrier integrity, and promote pro-inflammatory responses. The researchers specifically called out the limitations of current safety assessment frameworks, noting that they primarily rely on acute toxicity endpoints and do not routinely consider gut microbiota modulation or chronic low-dose exposure. In other words, the tests that regulators have been using to decide whether carrageenan is safe were never designed to detect the kind of harm that newer microbiome research is now finding. The safety approval was based on the wrong kind of question, and millions of people consuming daily yogurt containing this ingredient are doing so without any idea this research exists. The CNN Health Desk in May 2025 reported on the growing body of emulsifier research with a headline that captured the scientific consensus emerging among gut health researchers. Ice cream and thousands of foods with emulsifiers may upset your gut health. The article quoted researchers who said these chemicals are creating inflammatory responses in the gastrointestinal tract and altering the microbiome lining it. Studies have found emulsifiers can alter the balance of bacteria in the gut, damage the lining of the gastrointestinal tract, and trigger inflammation that potentially contributes to problems elsewhere in the body. This is appearing in mainstream medical journalism because the peer-reviewed evidence has reached a critical mass. This is no longer a fringe concern. Now let's talk about the sweetener problem in yogurt, because it runs even deeper than the emulsifier issue. Dannon fruit on the bottom yogurts contain carrageenan and disodium phosphate, along with modified food starch. The fruit on the bottom is not really fruit in the way you imagine it. It is a sweetened, thickened, industrially produced gel that contains the idea of strawberry or peach or blueberry while delivering a sugar content that competes with candy. Dannon low-fat vanilla yogurt contains 22 grams of sugar in just 5.3 ounces, with 17 of those being added sugars. To put that in perspective, some buying guides have noted that per ounce it contains more sugar than children's Go-Gurt and approaches the sugar density of premium dessert yogurts. This is a product being purchased daily by parents who believe they are giving their families something nutritious. Chobani Flip products deserve specific attention because they occupy a particularly clever marketing space. The Chobani brand built its reputation on Greek yogurt, on high protein, simple ingredients, and a cleaner approach than traditional flavored yogurt competitors. That reputation was largely earned during the brand's early years, but the Flip product line represents a significant departure. Chobani Flip Key Lime Crumble contains both cane sugar and brown sugar, totaling 17 grams of combined sugars, along with additives and refined fats, including soybean oil. The product is being bought as a healthy snack by people who trust the Chobani name and the Greek yogurt category. What they are actually buying is closer to a dessert product that happens to be sold in the yogurt aisle. Yoplait Original is a product line that has been in American kitchens for decades. The brand is a household name, but independent ingredient analysis consistently places multiple Yoplait product lines in the ultra-processed category, loaded with added sugars, modified food starch, artificial colors, and preservatives. The Yoplait Whips line, marketed as a fun, light yogurt option, contains 18 grams of added sugars in a single serving. What makes this particularly significant is that sugar is not the only concern. When manufacturers reduce sugar to create light or diet products, they often replace it with non-nutritive sweeteners. And the science on those sweeteners in gut health has become deeply uncomfortable. A comprehensive review published in April 2025 in PMC titled Artificial Sweeteners, a Double-Edged Sword for Gut Microbiome, examined the peer-reviewed literature on how commonly used sweeteners interact with gut bacteria. The findings highlight a deeply inconvenient irony. Sucralose, which is minimally metabolized by the human body, reaches the colon largely intact, meaning it interacts directly with the bacteria living there. Studies report a decrease in beneficial groups like bifidobacteria and lactobacilli in response to sucralose exposure. Aspartame has been found to alter microbiota diversity in animal studies, increasing populations of Enterobacteriaceae and Clostridium leptum. Research published in Frontiers in Microbiology in 2025, examining 5 common artificial sweeteners, found that multiple compounds at realistic consumption levels altered gut microbiome diversity and function in measurable ways. The cruel twist here is enormous. People are specifically reaching for sugar-free and light yogurt products to be healthier, to avoid the metabolic consequences of excess sugar. And some of the chemicals being used to replace that sugar are producing microbiome disruption that may contribute to exactly the kind of metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, that the consumer was trying to avoid in the first place. A 2025 review in PMC examining the gut-brain axis and artificial sweeteners noted that chronic consumption of non-caloric sweeteners may disrupt metabolic homeostasis, potentially contributing to insulin resistance and impaired glucose tolerance, effects that paradoxically resemble those associated with excessive sugar intake. You cannot win by switching from a sugary ultra-processed yogurt to a sweetened ultra-processed yogurt if both are built on industrial chemistry that disrupts the very biological systems you're trying to support. Let's talk about the Noosa brand, because it represents a different category of the same problem. Noosa markets itself with a distinctly premium artisanal identity. The packaging is elegant. The positioning is aspirational. This is not cheap grocery store yogurt. It signals quality and craft. But Noosa lemon yogurt in an 8-ounce tub contains 37 grams of sugar, with 25 of those being added sugars. That is more than 9 teaspoons of sugar in a single container, an amount approaching the sugar content of a can of Coke. Noosa is not a health food. It is a dessert product. The premium positioning and artisanal branding create a powerful psychological signal that this is a quality, wholesome product. The actual sugar content tells a completely different story. What we are looking at across these brands is a systematic pattern, a pattern where the marketing vocabulary of health, probiotic, natural, live cultures, light, gut-friendly, protein-rich, is being applied to products that contain ingredients specifically flagged by emerging nutritional science as potentially harmful to the gut microbiome, the immune system, and metabolic health. A pattern where the reputation of a genuinely nutritious food category is being leveraged to sell ultra-processed products to consumers who believe they are making healthy choices. And the regulatory landscape provides essentially zero protection against this pattern. The FDA has no standard that prevents a yogurt containing carrageenan, modified food starch, artificial sweeteners, and added sugars from being labeled as probiotic and gut healthy. The live and active culture seal, which sounds impressively official, is administered by the National Yogurt Association, an industry trade group. It certifies that a product contains live bacteria above a certain threshold at the time of manufacture. It says nothing about what else is in the product. It says nothing about whether the industrial additives surrounding those live cultures are undoing the very health benefits those cultures are supposed to provide. In fact, the EWG, the Environmental Working Group, published a 2025 report noting that the key to identifying genuinely healthy products is looking beyond front-of-package marketing claims, which frequently include phrases, colors, and symbols intended to mislead consumers about what is inside. The EWG specifically called out yogurts with added flavors, artificial colors, or zero-calorie sweeteners as examples of products where the front label promises health, while the ingredient list tells a different story. Their food scores database, which rates over 150,000 food and drink products based on nutrition, ingredients, and degree of processing, flags ultra-processed yogurt products as problematic, and the list of products flagged is extensive. So what does the evidence actually tell you to buy? Because this story is not just about what to avoid. It is about understanding what you're actually looking for, so you can make decisions grounded in real science rather than marketing language. Real yogurt, the kind that actually deserves the health reputation the industry is borrowing, has a remarkably short ingredient list. Cultured milk, maybe live cultures listed by their scientific names, Lactobacillus bulgaricus, Streptococcus thermophilus. If it's flavored with actual fruit, the fruit is listed as a recognizable whole ingredient. That's it. That is what yogurt is supposed to be. No modified food starch, no carrageenan, no polysorbate 80, no artificial flavors, no synthetic sweeteners, no colors from petroleum derivatives, no locust bean gum as a primary thickener. The shorter the ingredient list, and the more recognizable every ingredient, the more likely you are looking at something that genuinely deserves to be called a health food. Buying guides that have independently evaluated national brands, based on ingredient transparency and minimal processing, consistently identify a small number of products that hold up to scrutiny. Plain Greek yogurts from brands like Fogg Total and Siggy's, particularly their plain, unflavored varieties, consistently feature short, clean ingredient lists. Siggy's in particular has built its brand around Icelandic Skyer traditions and a genuine commitment to fewer and simpler ingredients, with notably lower sugar content than most competitors and no synthetic thickeners in their core plain varieties. Stonyfield. Organic, plain Greek yogurt, which uses organic milk and simple culturing processes, is consistently identified as a product that respects the traditional integrity of the fermented dairy category. The key purchasing insight, and this is something you can act on every single time you set foot in a grocery store, is that the front of the label tells you what the brand wants you to think. The back of the label tells you the truth. Specifically, if you see carrageenan in an ingredients list, that is a meaningful red flag based on current peer-reviewed science. If you see modified food starch listed early in the ingredient order, meaning it is present in a significant quantity, that is a red flag. If you see sucralose, acesulfame potassium, aspartame, or saccharin in a yogurt marketed as a health product, you need to understand that the scientific literature on those compounds and gut microbiome health is at minimum concerning and, at worst, deeply troubling. And if the total added sugar content is above 8 or 9 grams per serving, you are looking at a product where any probiotic benefit is being counteracted by the metabolic load of industrial sweeteners. Researchers and nutritionists call it ultra-processing. And understanding what ultra-processing actually means, not as a buzzword, not as marketing language, but as a precise scientific description of what happens to food before it reaches your mouth, is going to completely change how you evaluate everything you buy. So let's start there, with the science, with the real definition. The NOVA classification system was developed by researchers at the University of São Paulo, and it is now the most widely used framework for categorizing foods by their degree of processing. It breaks all food into 4 groups. Group 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods, things like fresh fruits, vegetables, plain milk, eggs, plain meat. Group 2 is processed culinary ingredients, oils, butter, flour, salt. Group 3 is processed foods, things like canned vegetables, cheese, cured meats, products that use preservation or fermentation techniques on whole food. Group 4 is ultra-processed foods. And this is the category that is reshaping how the scientific community understands chronic disease in the modern world. Ultra-processed foods, according to NOVA, are not just heavily processed versions of real food. They are industrial formulations that use ingredients extracted from foods or derived from food. You will never look at that dairy aisle the same way again. Let me be clear before we go any further, because I'm not here to mislead you. Real yogurt, plain, minimally processed yogurt made from cultured milk, is genuinely one of the most nutritious foods you can eat. It is rich in protein, calcium, probiotics, and beneficial compounds that research has consistently linked to improved gut health, better metabolic function, and reduced risk of chronic disease. The problem is not yogurt. The problem is what the food industry has done to yogurt. The problem is the gap between what yogurt is supposed to be and what most of the brightly packaged products in that dairy case have actually become. That gap has a name, or saccharin in a yogurt marketed as a health product. You need to understand that the scientific literature on those compounds and gut microbiome health is at minimum concerning and at worst deeply troubling. And if the total added sugar content is above 8 or 9 grams per serving, you are looking at a product where any probiotic benefit is being counteracted by the metabolic load of industrial sweeteners.